Hey, with the working. Hey, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm trying. Okay, do I have an echo now? Yes, if I can figure out how to do a recording, I will definitely put it out there. I think it'll give it to me automatically, but awesome. Hi, Kelly. You're so funny. Okay, I'm gonna wait a few minutes before getting started just because I feel like that's what you're supposed to do for these things. But again, this is my first Twitch ever. I have no idea what I'm doing. So you'll learn with me. I have gotten some advice from friends on what to do on a technical level. So hopefully that'll go okay. And I'm glad that it's even up right now. I'm pretty proud of that. Um, but we're going to be doing React 101 today. It's something that I've taught a bunch of times, and I'm really excited to try it with a different audience. Yeah, eCam Live is pretty cool. My one thing before starting is if you don't have Node installed, go ahead and install Node.js. So I will put that link in the chat. Cool. Well, I guess I'll just go ahead and start talking about what we're going to learn today. So, we're going to be talking about what React is, first of all. Then, we're going to talk about what components are, and also start diving into some of the concepts like state and props and how to pass data around. You can use whatever computer for the most part, but just make sure it's like a computer you can install Node on. We're going to be using Create React App for this, but you could also use something like a Code Sandbox or CodePen if you wanted to. Just some of the instructions would be a little bit different. So that will be that. So just a quick introduction to what React even is. It is a library built by Facebook, and the purpose of it is to make building user interfaces more accessible and quick. So instead of separating concerns by files, so maybe in your beginner programming journey, you've learned to always make a separate HTML, CSS, and JavaScript file. Instead of doing that, we're going to be building what's called components. And components are going to make it so that we have all of our JavaScript code and our view code, the templating code that you would normally write in HTML, all in one file. And that's going to make it easier for us to reuse components over and over again. The example I like to give of this is when React moved from likes to reactions. Think about how many like buttons there are on Facebook. There are like buttons on pictures. There are like buttons on statuses. There are like buttons on pages. And when they moved to reactions, they had to change what that like button did in a lot of different places. If you're doing this in just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you would have to like find and replace that code and change it in a lot of places. But with React components, it's going to make it so that you only have to change the code in one place. And that makes writing your code more straightforward and a little bit quicker. And it's going to make it easier for multiple developers to work on the same application, which is really important as well. Today we're going to be using React hooks, which is the latest version of React. Back in 2015 when I learned React, ES6 wasn't fully implemented yet, so I literally wrote React components using objects and this function called create class. Anybody's in the audience that or on the stream that also wrote React in that era, it was definitely very different. But then we moved back into using ES6 classes to write those components, and then most recently we've been using hooks to do that. And it's going to allow us to just write functions that hook into the React internals and allows us to do all those awesome things that we did with class-based components, but with just functions. The classes are a little bit verbose and take up a lot of code to just write a component. So using function-based hooks is really nice. Also, while I'm going through this, feel free to put like any questions in the chat. And somebody said that I look a little bit nervous. Yes, I'm incredibly nervous. So you're very much correct there. This is the first time I am doing a stream like this, and things could go wrong at any moment, but I'm excited to try something new. So we are going to look at the breakdown of what a component might be. So I'm going to share my screen. Just a second. And we're going to look at what Facebook might look like. Whoa, it is sharing both of my screens, not just one of them. Huh. Okay. Let's see. Amazing. Fixed it. Okay. So let's look at what a component might look like. So this is a Facebook status that Dev2 wrote about one of my blog posts, and I broke it down into what these components may be for a Facebook status. So in the first place, a Facebook status in and of itself might be a whole component. And then within there, we might have this little menu bar that pops up. We might have this status or the name and date that the status was posted. Then we might have the status text itself, and then we could have a social card here with information about the post. And then there could be this reactions bar that says that there's 22 shares, 2 comments, and 91 reactions. And then there's this bar of buttons. So each one of these boxes may be a component. But one of the beauties of breaking your user interface down into components is that you can do it in a bunch of different ways. So depending on your application, each one of these 3 buttons might be their own component. Or this bar might be its own component. Or the whole status might be its own component. And there might not be other components within it, just depending on your application. And so similar to HTML, where you will have a tag and then you might have tags within it, you're going to have a component in React, and then you can have components within that component. So those are called subcomponents. So we're going to be doing that today. Awesome. So cool. Wait, how do I stop? Oh, no, figured it out. Never mind. I think I'm just gonna be screen sharing from here on out because I can't figure out how to stop. A question about, do I know any book about React? I don't necessarily know many books. I'm using Ecamm Live to stream, but there are definitely some amazing courses, and I can send out links to those at the end and pull those up. If you'd like a more visual introduction, I actually have a blog post, and this Twitch stream is going to be turned into a blog post at the end as well. But this is what I am using, or what I have as a React tutorial that I have already out there. And a question about how I can analyze the UI, or maybe I can know whether to transform my component into small components. It's going to really depend on your application. So your components should be small. They should fulfill one requirement. They should be reusable, and they should be testable, and they should be independent. So they shouldn't rely on one another. So those are some of the rules to follow when you're trying to decide whether something should be its own component or not. You can always refactor something to have more components down the road or less components, but it's kind of like programming. It's like, should I break this down into a lot of functions, or should I just have one big function? It's going to depend on your use case and what you need in your code, what you're going to reuse, what you're not going to reuse, what is going to be a small chunk of code versus a bigger chunk of code. So that is how you know how to break things into subcomponents. And it's something that you're going to get used to over time as well. It's not something that is necessarily something that has one rule that you're always going to follow. It's something that you build up over time. Okay, so I think one of the best ways to do this is to actually get started and start writing some code. So I'm going to be using create React app and the command line in order to do this. That being said, if you wanted to use something like CodePen or Code Sandbox, you can definitely search that as well. There are probably templates out there to create a React app on there, but we're going to use create React app on the command line just in order to get used to those tools. So I'm going to pull up my terminal, and I have way too many things open because I'm working on a bunch of different apps for work right now. I'm going to zoom in on this. And if you have Node installed, you should be able to run the command npx create react app intro to React or something along those lines. So npx is a command that allows you to run other commands without installing them first. So we don't actually need to install create React app on our computers. We can just use this npx command to run it. And this is going to make it more secure and also going to make it so that we get the latest versions of things as soon as we need them. And then Intro to React is the name of our application. So each time that you create a new React app, you will run this command again, npx create React app, whatever your application name is. In this case, I'm calling it Intro to React. And I'm going to run this. It's going to take a little bit to run. Thanks for that tip on making my game science and technology. Yeah, so much of the architecture stuff is going to come down to your application, your needs for it, and we're going to learn a basic architecture today. Create React app is going to create a bunch of React scaffolding for us, a lot of different files, but it's going to come down to your use case and what you actually need to do in your application. And you may get some warnings like this. It's because of the version of Mac that I'm on that I'm getting all these different warnings, but they're not actually going to break anything. They're just red and look a little scary. Ooh, I can put the commands in the chat. So your system might be running depending on your operating system, but once it's done running, go ahead and cd into the directory that it created for you. So it's going to be intro to React for me. It's going to be whatever you called your app when you ran the command. So cd intro to React, and then I'm going to open up my text editor. I use VS Code or Visual Studio Code. It's my favorite, and I love Fairy Floss, which is this purple theme here. And I want to walk through the fact that Create React app created all these files for us. And that can be a little intimidating at first, but really the rule of thumb here is that there's only a couple files that you'll actually need, and Create React app saves you from having to write a lot of this yourself. So the first big folder that Create React app creates for you is node modules. And node modules is going to contain all the modules that you're using for your application. Modules are essentially just other people's code that you're reusing. You don't want to reinvent the wheel every single time you build an application. So those are going to be there for you. You can see that they're grayed out because we're not going to want to push these to GitHub, but that's what's in your node modules there. And then in public, okay, I'll move my stuff. I don't know how to move my face view, but I can move my code. So then there's this public folder, and this is something that you don't really necessarily need to use either. So your favicon is going to be that icon that shows up on your Chrome tab when you have it open. So like this is my favicon right here. That's all that is. You don't necessarily need to change that right now. It's a React icon there. Your index.html, this is your HTML file that your application is going to bind onto. There's a lot pre-written in here already, but again, you don't really need to touch this too much. You might want to change your title for your app or link in something down the road, but for now, don't worry too much about this file, more just showing that it exists. These two files here are different logos for your application. It also links into this manifest.json here, so you can actually build your Create React app into what's called a progressive web app pretty easily. And these three files are for dealing with that. So a progressive web app is an application that's available offline. We're not going to dive too much into that today by any means, but that's what some of these files are for in case you want to build your application into a progressive web application. And then your robots.txt file, this defines all the rules for like crawling your website. So if you have bots looking at your website, maybe for Google indexing or something along those lines, this defines the rules for those. So again, we don't need to really worry about that unless you're really worried about SEO or something along those lines. I'm going to go through the source last, but there are 4 more files right here. Git Ignore, and Git Ignore tells Git to ignore certain files, so you're not pushing these to GitHub. So certain files like .env, this might be where you put like passwords or something like that. You don't want that on your public GitHub profile, so that's going to be Git ignored. Some of these are like log files, and those don't necessarily need to be transferred from computer to computer. And then your node modules, again, these are a bunch of libraries that other people have written, and so we don't need to push them up to GitHub either because they're already on there. And honestly, if you forget to Git ignore your node modules, it can take like half an hour to push your code up to GitHub, and it is miserable. You don't want to deal with that. Your package JSON is going to have your project metadata, so you can see that it has things like name, version, whether it's private, your dependencies. Their dependencies are the different libraries that the project depends on. You have some scripts here. We're going to use those. The browser list, these are the browsers that your application works on. And you can configure things inside of here, but we don't need to really do too much with it yet, or really at all for today. Your package lock.json has a bunch of information about the dependencies for our dependencies and the exact versions that are being used. Never edit this file manually. This is automatically generated, so you don't want to touch this one at all. Then your README has information about your project. It's written, it's almost like a description of your project. You've probably seen this before if you've ever worked with GitHub. And then the last part is your source, and this is where we're going to be writing most of our code. So the first file is app.css, and that's going to have our app component specific CSS. You have your app.js, and this is going to be where we write our first top level component. And then we have our app.test.js. This is where you would have automated testing for your application. for your app component specifically. We're not going to be doing that today, but if that's something that you're interested in, Jest or React Testing Library are two great ones to use, and they have really great documentation. Index CSS would have all of your project-specific CSS. So instead of your component-specific, just for the whole application, there are different strategies for doing CSS in React. We won't talk about them too much today, but there are different things there. Index.js, we're going to come back to this, but this has a lot of configuration information for getting your React app set up. Your logo SVG, this is just a React logo that they include in there for the homepage. Your service worker, this again has to do with that progressive web app that we're not going to do today. So you can also ignore that file, but it's pretty cool if you did want to have a progressive web app down the road that you could do that. And then setup tests, this is for configuring your testing code for your project. So if you were to use Jest or React Testing Library, this is where you would set that up. Ooh, got a good question. What is a test? So a test is code that you write that makes sure that your other code is working the way that you want it to. So you can make sure that when you're adding new code, you're not breaking your code that's already there. So it's really helpful to have, but a little bit more advanced than we're going into today. Love these questions. Okay. So before we go too much further, I want to show you what we're going to be building out today. Let me find the link. So this is a final version of what we're going to be building out in this tutorial. So essentially what you can do is you can click on these buttons and it's going to change the app background to the background that we have on the button. So nothing incredibly fancy, but it's a good demo for showing state props, and we're also going to pass state around a little bit as well. So that's what we're going to be building out today. Okay, so now that we're into the code, I want to first walk through what the index.js file is doing. Let me I have a bunch of notes written out for this. Okay. So we are going to go into our index.js file real quick. And there is some code already in here. And I use a different formatter for my code, which is why it's giving me all these red squigglies at the semicolons. I personally don't love having semicolons in my JavaScript code, so it's giving me a warning about that. But you most likely will not get those red warnings there, and I'm just going to fix that right there. So the first couple lines are a bunch of imports. Import React from React. This is allowing us to use the React library within this file. And specifically, whenever we're using what's called JSX within a file, we're going to need to import React. So this is JSX. JSX looks a lot like HTML, but it's written within our JavaScript code, and React is going to allow us to do that. It's going to use this kind of syntax here. And then the import syntax is also part of ES6. I actually thought until really recently that it was Webpack doing this, but it's actually built into JavaScript now that we can import and export from files. So fun fact that I learned recently. And then React DOM is going to allow us to use React specifically within the browser or for the web. So there's also React Native, and that allows you to write code for the desktop or for mobile apps. We're going to be using React for the DOM specifically, which is going to allow us to write React within the web browser. Import index CSS, this is going to apply our CSS file. You know, in normal HTML where you have to link a CSS file with a link tag, this is going to stand in for that. We can just import it instead. This is going to allow us to use our app component within this file as well. And then this again is going to be for that service worker. We're going to ignore that because it's for the progressive web app and we're not doing that today. So that's what those lines of code are doing. It's essentially just taking code from other files and allowing us to use those pieces of code within this file. And then we're doing React DOM.render, and this is going to attach our React application onto our actual HTML or our actual DOM. So I'm going to open up that index.html again and see how there's this div with the ID root here. What we're doing right here in this line is we're saying grab that element with the ID root and attach our React app to it. We have our app component and we're going to be writing that in a little bit, but it's saying to attach that app component to the React or the element with the ID root. This React strict mode is just going to give you stricter error messages. They just added this to Create React app relatively recently, but you could delete it if you wanted to, but it's just for debugging and for developer experience. It's not going to really affect your app too much. And somebody just asked if this is Fairy Floss theme. It is Fairy Floss theme. This is my favorite. I also have the Fairy Floss keyboard, so everything is matching. It's pretty exciting. Cool. So we're not going to write any code within here, but I thought it was important to discuss. And if you ever go outside of Create React App, you may need to write something like this yourself. So where you do the React DOM.render with your component and then attach it to some sort of element created in your HTML file. So we're actually going to write our code within our app.js file. There's actually some code already written in here. But first, before I do this, I'm going to actually run my application. So I can run the command npm start. And it's going to take a second to fire up, but once it does, it's going to open up a local server with my React app. So it's going to have localhost 3000, and right now it's going to have this stuff rendering on the page. And this local server is going to hot reload our code for us. What that means is as soon as I make a change within this app file, so if I delete this learn React right here, as soon as I do that and save, so you can do like Command S normally, or I have autosave configured, so it's going to automatically save my code for me and I don't need to worry about it. I do that because teaching code, I always forget while I'm screen sharing to actually save. So one hot tip that you can do that. So as soon as I deleted this Learn React, you can see that it disappeared from my page. I didn't need to refresh or anything like that. The server just did it for me. In addition, Create React App is doing a lot of other things for me as well. But one really big thing is that you can see I'm writing actually HTML syntax, which is called JSX, right within my JS file or my JavaScript file. That is not something that you can do with regular JavaScript. So if I was just trying to run this app.js file in the browser natively, we would get a bunch of errors because this is not valid JavaScript code. If it was, I think we would teach React or JavaScript a lot different from day one. So behind the scenes, Create React App is using this tool called Babel. What Babel does is it transpiles your code, and transpile is the mashup between translate and compile. So it's going to take this JSX code and make it something that the browser can understand. Behind the scenes, it's like a JavaScript object, and it's going to use that and render that within the browser. So Babel allows us to write this JSX syntax. It doesn't work natively within the browser. And then, what else? There's also Webpack, and Webpack is what's doing the hot reloading and some of the bundling of files behind the scenes and all that too. So Create React App is doing a lot of the configuration for us that we used to have to do by hand, and it was not very fun. So I'm going to go ahead and actually clear out everything within this return here of my app function. So instead of returning all that code there, I'm just going to make it return each one hello world. And you can see that in the browser, an each one with hello world pops up. I could use my inspector like normal in Chrome, and you can see that it's just normal HTML that is created here. So I have my div with ID root that we talked about a few minutes ago, and then I have my h1 hello world that appears here. And that's how we write React code, is we can just pretty much write HTML code, return it from a JavaScript function, and it's going to render on our page. It's pretty awesome and makes development in a lot of ways a lot easier. I also want to talk about maybe when you shouldn't use React. So React is a really, really great tool for developers, and it's also allows for us to do a lot of nice things like single page routing, where you have really nice transitions in between each page on your web app. So there's a lot that's really nice about React, and it also can make updating the page look a lot faster as well to the user. But when you're loading something like JavaScript in, you are loading a bunch of JavaScript code that you're giving to your end user. So that can really hit your performance and make it so that not everybody, especially those on mobile devices, on slow load times, are going to have more difficulty loading your application. So for really simple applications, I would not recommend using React. I would just use your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript like usual. But there are also some really nice tools now that will allow you to write React code, and then behind the scenes, it'll really just be HTML rather than having all this JavaScript loaded to your end user. So Next.js is one of my favorite tools for doing that. You can definitely look into server-side rendering, which will make it so that you're not actually giving that much JavaScript to your end user, and it's not as much parsing or anything like that. So definitely look into that if you're interested in performance and making React more performant. But that being said, we're going to go ahead and write the markup for our color switcher app. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to create one outside div right here, and then a div inside that for our CSS, and then we're going to create an h1 color picker. So the color picker just showed up on the page. And then we're going to create 3 buttons. So the first one is going to have the class name red and the text red. So now you can see that I have this little button that says red show up right there. I'm going to have a button with class name equals blue and have blue here. And then button class name equals yellow with the text yellow on it. Okay, one thing that's going to be different between normal HTML and JSX is that instead of using class for CSS classes, we're going to have class name. So class is already a thing within JavaScript. You may have seen ES6 classes, so class below, something like this. And it's to implement object-oriented programming within JavaScript. So class is already a reserved word within JavaScript, and it already means something. So for a CSS class within React, we're going to instead use class name. So class and then the uppercase N and then name. And that's going to be how we do a CSS class. Other than that, it works the same as a class within normal HTML. So now you can see that we have this title color picker, and then we have red, blue, and yellow. We have our little buttons on there. And I'm going to go ahead and write some CSS code. Quick vote, do you all want me to just share out my CSS code, or do you want to all write it together? Which one would be more helpful? Let me know in the chat. Share it. Yeah, that's kind of my vote too, is that this is more of a React tutorial than a CSS tutorial, so I'll probably just send out my CSS code. Okay, so I'm creating a gist right now with it. Here we go. Sending it out in the chat. Okay, so I just sent in the chat GitHub gist with all of my CSS code in it. I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. I'm going to delete all the CSS in my app.css right now. I don't need any of that. I'm going to instead paste in that code that I just sent out. And you can see that magic appears and my app looks a lot better. And I need to actually add classes onto these divs as well. So this first one is going to be class name equals React root. And the second one is going to be class name equals center. Amazing. So now I have my 3 buttons. One's red, one's blue, one's yellow, and then my color picker right here. I'll give just another second for people to copy and paste that in if you're following along. Also, feel free to flag me in chat if I'm going too fast or too slow or whatever. This, again, is my first ever Twitch stream, so I am learning along with you all. And somebody just asked what I am drinking. I am drinking Dunkin' Donuts iced coffee because I am such a New England girl at heart. So the thing that we need to do now is to make this interactive. So what we need to have happen is when I click on the red button, the background turns red. When I click on the blue button, the background turns blue. And when I click on the yellow button, it turns yellow. And the way that I'm going to do this is I'm actually going to add on a class to this React root here. So if I add red on here, my background turns red. And if I do blue, my background turns blue. And if I do yellow, my background turns yellow. And the reason for that is that I have 3 classes already set up in my CSS, where the red one is going to make my background red. If I do the blue one, my background is going to be blue. And if I do the yellow one, my background color is going to be yellow. So that's why I am doing that. And that's how that works. So again, what I'm going to need to do is have some sort of variable here. that determines whether the background should be red, yellow, or blue, and then have that variable change depending on what button that I used. And in order to have a variable that updates and updates our user interface to match within React, we're going to use state. So state is just a variable that's going to change over the course of our application running. So at the beginning of our application, it could be an empty string, but then it could be set to red later on, it could be blue after that, or it could be yellow after that. So that is what we're going to create, is we're going to use state here. Somebody just asked me if there's a difference between single and double quotes. There is not. I just prefer the look of single quotes, which is why I use them, but React by default uses double quotes. The only time that it matters is if you have something like a string with a single quote within it, then you would need to use a single quote there, or double quotes to enclose the whole entire string. Because if I did something like this, then it doesn't know where my string is starting or stopping. So that's the only place that it really matters. Okay, so I need to use state here, and I need to import a React hook in order to do that. So hooks are special functions within React that allow us to essentially do special things within React. And hooks are relatively new to React, so if you're using an older version of React, more than a couple years old, hooks are not going to work for you within that version of React. So you do need to be using a more recent version of React there. So I am importing useState here, and it does need these curly braces. The curly braces are saying import something specific from React rather than the whole entire React library. So that's what we need to do there. And then we are going to go ahead and create a state variable. So we're going to say const color equals useState with an empty string. So the empty string is saying that when this application starts running, the color variable is going to be set to an empty string by default. Let's actually console log what color is. Okay, so when this application runs, you can see that color is now console logging. And you can see that it's actually an array. So it isn't just one variable, it's actually giving us two things. The first thing is this empty string right here, and then the second thing is a function. If I change this to yellow, then that first variable in my array is going to be yellow, and then the second one is still going to be a function. If I change it to blue, the first item in the array is going to be blue, and then the second one is going to be that function. So what's actually being done here is this first item in the array is going to be what the variable is currently set to. So what your state is currently. So in this case, it's blue because I initialized it to blue. The function takes that argument of what color or what we're going to initialize state to be. And then the second one is a function that we can use to update state. So what you'll normally see is array destructuring here. So color set color in an array just like this. And what that's going to do is it's going to take the first item in that array that's returned from useState and set it to color. And then the second item in that array is going to set to this set color right here. So now you can see that when I console log color, it's just blue instead of that array with two items in them. And then you can see if I console log this set color, it's still that function that's going to allow me to update that color variable. So that's what you'll normally see React developers do. And again, that's array destructuring. Let me send out a link on that if it's the first time that you're seeing it, because I know that one gets a little confusing. So I just sent out a link on array destructuring if anybody wants to read up more on that, but that's the syntax that I'm using right there. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is, instead of just having this hard-coded yellow right in here, I'm going to actually make it so that my class name is a variable, so that it's going to have whatever color is within it. So instead of my class name being a string, it's going to be JavaScript code. And whenever I want to use JavaScript code within my JSX code, or within this return here, I'm going to use curly braces, and that's going to tell React that I am writing JavaScript code within here. And then I can use string interpolation here instead of my quotes, and then I can use variables within my string. Okay, so now whatever color is going to be plugged into the classes that I have on this element. So if I change my state to be yellow, then my background turns to yellow. If I change it to red, now my background is going to be red. So I'm making progress here. So again, this class is going to update based off of whatever I have my color variable set to. And then what I need to do is I need to actually make my buttons work. So what I need to have happen is when I click on my red button, this color variable gets updated to be red. So how I add an event listener in React is in line like this. So onClick equals a function. I'm just going to do an inline arrow function here. So what's going to have happen is whenever I click on this red button, it is going to run this function here that's going to set my color to be red. And once my color variable updates, the return is actually going to rerun, and that's going to make it so that my background is red and I don't even have to do anything else. So if you've written vanilla JavaScript before, you normally have to do something where you update that div and add a class to it or something along those lines, or you need to rerun a whole entire chunk of code in order to actually get your user interface to update. Instead, with React, it's just going to do that automatically for us, which makes the developer experience really nice. So fingers crossed, what's going to happen is when I click on this, it just set my color variable to red. You can also use the React Dev Tools. Let's see, do I have them installed on this computer? I do. So React Dev Tools. Let me send this out. This is a really amazing Chrome extension that can show you what state is being set to at different times. So if I go to the Component tab here, click on my app component, you can see all of my state variables. In this case, just one. And you can see that right now it's stored as red. If I refresh my application here, you can see that it goes back to an empty string. But then when I click that red button, it turns to red. And I could type in here and say yellow, and you'll see that when I type yellow, it changes my background to yellow. So that's a really, really nice tool for seeing what things are set to at certain times. So again, this set color function is a function that I can use to update whatever that color variable is set to there. I'm going to also make it so that my blue and yellow buttons work, because Right now, they don't do anything. Just the red button works. So I need to do the same thing for both of those. I need to add event listeners to them. So onClick is going to be the event listener that's listening for a click on the element. Set color blue. Which is going to set my color to yellow. So now when I click on the red button, it turns red. When I click the blue button, it turns blue. And then when I click the yellow button, it turns yellow. Pretty exciting. We're making a lot of progress here. And again, if you want me to re-explain anything or talk more in depth about anything, please leave it in the chat. I am reading that and we'll definitely get to those questions. Because I know that this is a little confusing, especially at first. Very magical. But again, when state variables update, they refresh our app so our user interface reflects the changes to state. Yeah, I think somebody just asked about string interpolation. So string interpolation allows you to write JavaScript code within a string. So a string is something within quotes. It's like a word. And so this is going to allow me to plug that color variable directly into my string. I could also write something like this. React root plus color. And that will do exactly the same thing without string interpolation. So I could add two strings together instead, and that would also work. Ooh, and I got a question. If I have 100 buttons with hundreds of different colors, should I make 100 set colors with different colors? That's what we're going to do next, is we're going to refactor this a little bit so that instead of doing this repetitive like so, we're going to actually have a second component for our buttons. Awesome. So we're going to create a second React component here. And how we do that is we just create a second file within our source folder. So it needs to be within this source folder here. And we'll name it something like switch color button. Let's call it that. So switch color button.js. So we have a new JavaScript file. And just got another question asking if the curly braces is to say that it's JavaScript code. So yes, anything that I have within my curly braces, within my return, is telling React that I'm writing JavaScript code within those curlies. So if I did something like this, this would write my color variable on the screen right there. So you can see that it now says like red, blue, yellow. So those curly braces are to say that we're writing JavaScript code within them. Okay, so within our new component, we are going to first import React. And we need to do this within any file that we are writing JSX code. So again, JSX code is this code that looks like HTML that we can write directly within our JavaScript. And so any file that we want to write that in, we need to import React into. And then we can create a component by creating a function. And I'm going to name it the same thing as I named my file just to make it a little bit less confusing. And then I'm going to export this switch color button. Before, I've been importing things. So import React useState from React, or in my index.js, which we haven't used in a little bit, I have import app from my app file. In order to import something into one file, I need to export it from that file. So in here, I'm importing my app from my app file. So I need to export it from this app.js file. So that's how I'm able to do so. And then I need to return something from this function. So return maybe just a button for now. So button that says hi. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to import this switch color button into my app component. So import switch color button from switch color button. So when I'm importing a module like this, then I can just have the name of the module. So in this case from React, and it's in my node modules, so it's going to look for React within here. But if I'm importing one of my own files, I need to do a / instead. And that's saying look in the same directory for a file called switch color button and import from that. So that's what I'm doing in this case here. Is I'm importing from that switch color button. If I had other folders within my source, I would need to have that folder within my import statement as well. But in this case, we're good to go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that switch color button component, and I can write it just like a custom HTML tag kind of. So if I do switch color button, and I can make it a self-closing tag. You can also have it not be a self-closing tag, but most cases you'll see it just be a self-closing tag like so. And you can see that now I have this hi button that shows up on my page. It's not standing out too much right now because it doesn't have any color to it, but now I have 4 buttons that show up. My switch color button, my red, blue, and yellow. And the really nice thing about this is that I can reuse this component. So now I can just copy and paste that 4 times, and now I have my button that shows up 4 times on my page. And that's really one of the huge benefits of React, is that I can write these components and reuse them over and over and over again within my code. I got another question about whether import order matters. It does not really matter, but you'll normally see people organize out the imports so that they're in an order that makes sense. So I organize them normally by like third-party imports first, so imports from React and all that, and then I import my own JavaScript code after that, and then I finally import my CSS code as the third step, or any images or anything like that. So that's normally how I organize it, but I think it's just more important that you do organize it, but your code will still run even if it's not organized. It's just for other developers to understand. Amazing. So what I'm going to do now is my switch color button isn't super useful yet, because right now if I display it, it just is the hi button a bunch of times. What I want it to do is for the first one to display red, the second one display blue, and the third one display yellow. And so in order to create components that render different things or have different text on them, we're going to use props. And what props allow us to do is pass data from the parent component to the child component. So in this case, it's going to allow me to pass data from my app component down to my switch color button. React practices what's called unidirectional data flow, and what that means is data is going to be passed only from the parent component to the child component. So I can pass data from my app component, which is my parent component, down to my switch color button, but not the other direction. So how I do that is it looks like the syntax for an attribute. So we're going to say color, and for the first one, it's going to be red. The second one is going to be blue, and the third one is going to be yellow. So again, within here, I am passing my props in what syntax looks like each HTML attribute. And then I can go to my switch color button, and I need to make it so that it takes the argument props. And then for now, I'm just going to console log what those props are. So I'll have both of these open. So again, color red, color blue, color yellow, and then console log what props are in here. And you can see that in my first hi component, I have an object and color is set to red. In my second one, color is set to blue. And my third one, color is set to yellow. So that matches with what I sent right here. So I sent color red in the first one, color blue to the second one, and color yellow to the third one. You can send multiple props as well. So you could do something like number equals 3, number equals 10, something like that. And now you can see that my first object has the keys color, red, and number 3. So it's taking these props that I'm sending using this syntax and coercing them into an object within my switch color button code. If code is JavaScript code, it's going to need to go in these curlies. So if it's not a string, it's going to need to go in these curly braces. So in this case, since it's a string, I can just put it in quotes here. But if it's not in quotes, or if it's not a string, then it needs to be passed in this curlies here. Yeah, and you can send as many props as you want. Normally you won't see too many, maybe like a couple, but you can have a lot of props passed from one component to another. So now I'm going to use these props. So instead of having button hi right here, I'm instead going to render the props.color here. So I need curlies in order to say JavaScript code. And then I can do props.color there. And now you can see that I have these 3 buttons here, each one with the color rendering. So props.red or props.color is red on the first one, blue and yellow here. And those React Dev tools that I talked about a little bit ago, you can go back to that Components tab and click on one of these components, the switch color button components, and you can see that color is set to red on that first one, color is blue on the second one, and color is yellow on the third one. So it's just an object, and you can access those keys like you would any other. And you can see that in my original ones, I have the class name with the color as well. So I'm going to add that here too. This is getting a little long, so I'm just gonna put it onto multiple lines. And now you can see that I have two sets of buttons, red, blue, yellow, red, blue, yellow, and they're the right color now. So I'm setting my class name to that props.color and the text here to line up with what I have before. So on each one of my original buttons, I have class name red, class name blue, and class name yellow. But my second set of buttons changes the background, but my first set of buttons does not. The first set of buttons is not working yet. My switch color button is not working. So what I need to do in order to make those buttons work is add that onClick event to these switch color buttons. My one catch is that if I just do a set color with my color in here, set color is defined in this file right here in my app.js. It's not defined in my switch color button.js. So I don't have access to this function yet. So let's try this out. So onClick equals, and we're gonna do a function here, set color, and instead of doing the color name, we're gonna do the props.color again. So that for the first one, the color will be red, for the second one, the color will be blue, and the third one, yellow. So we have class name props.color, we have the props.color showing up, and finally we're trying to get this onClick event to set my state of color to this props.color. Well, again, the problem is that this set color function is defined in my app component, but it's not yet defined within my switch color button component. So I somehow need to get the set color function from my top level component, my app component, down to my switch color button. Well, we just talked about this, that we can send data from one component to another using props. So I'm gonna do that. So I'm gonna copy and paste that on each of these three. And now that set color is going to be stored in that props object. So I can do props.setColor in this component here. So now this button has the class name props.color, and then it has an onClick event. And in theory, when we click on the button, it should run the set color function, which we're passing from our app component down to our switch color button component. And we're gonna pass whatever the props.color is for that component. Let's see if it works. So red, blue, yellow right there, and it does. So when I click these three buttons, my background changes to match. So functions work just like any other variable, and I can pass them from one component to another as props. I'm gonna delete my original set of buttons because I now have these three new buttons that do the same thing. And now there's that. Pretty exciting. So now we're using two components. We have a parent component, the app component, and then we have the switch color button, which is our child component. We're using props, and props are data that we're passing from one component to another, and they get moved into an object in your other component. And then we also have state, and state is any data that changes while our component or our application is running. So we have all of those different things there. Anything that people want me to go back over or any questions that I can answer for anybody, please leave them in the chat. Oh, you want me to show the switch color button? Cool. Ooh, somebody just asked me if I could use a for loop within my return. And using a for loop within your return is going to be a little bit tricky, but what you could do is you could do a dot map. And let me actually show what your code would look like if we did a dot map in here. So right now we have 3 different colors, right? We could make those into an array. So const colors equals an array with red, blue, and yellow in it. And then what we could do is we could do curlies to say JavaScript code. And then we could say colors.map color. And for each color, we're going to render an instance of our switch color button with that color. Or we'll just call this like current color because we already have a thing named color. I don't want to shadow that variable. Not that it really matters in this case, but okay. And then I can delete these. And this should work the way that it did before. So now I'm creating 3 instances of my component within a loop. I'm using a dot map instead of a traditional for loop. The for loop gets a little bit more confusing, but you can use one. It's just going to look a little bit different. The dot map is what you'll normally see React developers do instead. And then the third thing that we need to do here is add a key. So key is going to be current color as well. A key is going to be a thing for React to make it easier internally for React to differentiate between the items that we're creating within a loop. So if I don't have that key on there, it's just going to give me a warning. And so in order to fix that warning, I add that key attribute on there. Yeah, so now we could just add to this array here and add a green button. The green button is going to be gray unless I go into my CSS here and say green. And now we have a green button too. That's all we need to do. And a conditional is going to be similar, where you can have a conditional, but you'll see most React developers actually use ternary operators. Instead, it's just going to make your code a little bit easier as well. So this is not all pure JS. This is using JSX, which is this HTML like syntax right here. And we can't use that natively within the browser. So we're using Create React App, which behind the scenes is using Babel, which transpiles our React code and makes it more understandable, or makes it so that the browser can understand it. Awesome. So the last thing that I want to do is I want to deploy this. So I am going to go on to GitHub and create a repository for this. So new repository here. React color switcher or something along those lines. I'm going to make it public so I can send it out to all y'all. So if you need to copy any of the code, you can. And I'm going to add my code. And I'm going to go ahead and push this. So now my repo is up. I will send it out in the chat so you can go ahead and look at all the different files that we created and all the code and copy it if you need to. And I'm going to go ahead and deploy this project to AWS Amplify. There are different services that you can use to host React applications. I really like Amplify. It makes life easy. It's also my employer, so there is that. So I'm going to go to the AWS console and sign in. Mine's going to look a little bit different because work there, but I will send out this link right here. So this is the Amplify console. And if you sign up for it, you have like a year free tier. So unless you have a bunch of people visiting your app, which I do not imagine you would, it will be free for you to host for the first year at least. So I can also Slack out a link on creating an AWS account if you don't have one. Let's see. So this here is instructions for creating an AWS account. And then what you can do is you can click Connect App right here. And I pushed my code to GitHub, so it's on GitHub. I'll click that. And once I'm done there, I'm going to go ahead and click on the React color switcher. And I want to deploy my master branch. And you can see it actually pre-populates all my commands for me. You don't need to edit this, but the deployment command is npm run build, and that's going to build my React app and make it so that it is production ready code. And then it's going to deploy that build folder right there. And then you can click next and save and deploy. And it's going to take a couple of minutes to run. You can see that it's a creating app right now, but in a couple of minutes we should have a live link, and I'll send that out as well. I did get another question about the use state line, and I will go through that. So use state is our function that React gives us in order to use state within our function-based components. And use state gives us two things back. It gives us an array with two items in it. The first item is going to be what state is currently set to. So and then we're going to save that to our color variable. And then we're going to have this function set color, which allows us to update that variable. So we are using array deconstruction here in order to do that and to set those two different variables. It definitely is different than normal JavaScript, where you need to do so much code in order to update the appearance of your application and to like manipulate your HTML and do DOM manipulation and all that. But it's pretty nice and straightforward. Yeah, it's kind of like a getter and setter for color. That's a good way to think of it. So the color, that's going to be the variable there, and then this is how do you update it. Okay, and my application, I believe, is now ready to go. It is. So my application is good to go, verified, and it's live. So I'll send out this link right here. You can visit this to see what we did today. Amazing. And if you want to dive a little bit deeper, one of my favorite tutorials on React hooks is Dave Setia's complete React tutorial. It has a lot deeper understanding of all of this and is pretty awesome. So highly recommend. Set color is something from React. React gives us that once we use that use state function. And then I got a question if you're able to change the name of the URL on AWS Amplify. So the name, if you don't have a custom domain, is set. So it is that like random hash, this master D2Q320 whatever. That is the way it is, but you can plug in a custom domain pretty easily. So you can click like add domain here and then add in your domain name that you have set up. So if I wanted to like add in one of my custom domains, I could, but for the Amplify, for like .amplifyapp.com, it is this random hash. Awesome. Well, I can stay around for questions for a little bit longer, but this is what I had for today. This is the tutorial that I had put together. And I'll put the recording out, and my plan is to keep doing these live streams every Thursday. My plan for next Thursday is to do full stack application with vanilla JavaScript and AWS Amplify. So let me show you what app I'm planning to build with you all next week. So this right here is what I'm planning to build next week on this stream. So this app allows you to add new GIFs, edit the GIFs that are already on here, and all that. So, and list them, and they're all stored in a database. So this is what we'll be doing next week in this stream. But thank you all so much. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for being my first stream people ever. This was really fun. Oh, and which database? It's going to use DynamoDB and GraphQL. Also, if anybody has any feedback, please let me know. Again, this was my first ever stream. I have no idea what I'm doing, so let me know what I should do next time. Have a good one.